In this video, I take a look at my drawings of Japanese stone lanterns. In the previous video, I did a drawing of a Japanese stone lantern. Today, I'd like to review a selection of artworks that show my creative journey across a decade of drawing the same subject. How did my approach, tools, and technique change over time? Let's find out. The first stone lantern I ever drew was in a small shrine in Ueno Park in the center of Tokyo. It was also my first time drawing with a brush pen. I was happy with the pen's ability to create thick and thin lines, and I found the subject interesting to draw. Now, this drawing is pretty simple, and I wouldn't return to the subject for another 2 years, although I was paying attention to lanterns as I traveled around Japan. Trying new art supplies is always fun, and I started using both strong black and transparent color ink in Japan. This drawing was created with a traditional nib pen for the black ink and a small brush for the yellow areas. This was also my first real go at using a reference photo for a full artwork. You can see the level of detail has gone way up since the first drawing, but I'm still choosing to keep some compositional elements. This work continues my trend of using photo references for the sketch, but also shows that I was starting to add more fine detail. Take a look at the moss and small leaves at the bottom of the artwork. It was at this stage that I started noticing that the nib pen I was using maybe wasn't fine enough for the smallest details. Another development here is that I'm pretty closely sticking to the actual photo reference, and there are fewer abstract elements. Around this time, I started asking friends who had lived or traveled in Japan to send me their own stone lantern photos as reference material for my sketches. This particular drawing marks a significant change in my approach as I started using a mapping nib for the small details. A mapping nib is an incredibly fine and hard nib for an ink pen, and as the name suggests, was traditionally used by map makers. With this nib, I was able to get a lot more fine detail, but as you can imagine, the drawing process started taking up a lot more time. Maybe 2 or 3 weeks, I drew every blade of grass. This drawing leaves the background completely blank, so you can focus on the fine detail of the leaves and the moss on the stone. I remember this taking a long time to finish and maybe being a bit less keen on doing thousands of tiny dots by the end of it. These drawings with all the fine detail may have been impressive close up, but I was never really satisfied with how they balanced the strongest blacks with white spaces. I have always thought of this drawing as my most successful stone lantern. I think I managed to get the balance of compositional elements just about right. There is plenty of solid black, a nice window of white space over on the left, and a flow around the image that seems to work. Sure, there are some tiny dots, but just for effect. This drawing brought me back down to days instead of the weeks it took for the previous lanterns. This lantern drawing really shows how far each of my techniques had developed. But most significantly, I stopped using photos as a general reference and started tracing the main elements directly from them. Using the mapping pen had given me a taste for the close detail, and so wanting to get everything right started taking over. I'd use the mapping nib for the first lines, then fill in the solid blacks with a brush, then go back with the pens to do the smaller details. After those previous artworks, my technique was getting more advanced. But was it worth it? I remember this drawing taking weeks to complete. The next development was to stop doing 1,000 tiny dots and switch to ink and water. I was still tracing the photo for the basic elements and laying in the solid black ink with a brush. But instead of adding detail with a pen, with this artwork I began using watered down black ink to give the shades of grey. It created a very satisfying look and a lot closer to photorealism. Again, this took me a couple of weeks to complete this picture. I'm pretty sure this was the last full lantern artwork I completed. The technique didn't change much for this one, but it has a stronger contrast and I'm really happy with the result. It hits pretty close to that photorealism of the previous picture, and I think they make a good pair. I hope this video has been able to show one artist's journey through drawing a single subject. If you got this far, thank you for watching. You're very good looking and I'm sure you have excellent handwriting. You're watching Studio Brush Pen.